Welcome back to my channel. This one is going to be Fruit of Passion number 3, and we will continue on with what we've been working on. I have changed some of my opinions over the last couple months. I continue to watch stuff on YouTube about the current development of the history that I am referring to, and therefore I'm modifying some of what I thought before. And one of the major things that I'm going to be modifying is that I had said before that over 99% of the Philistines were wiped off the face of the earth when the volcano erupted in Thera. But I realize now with the testing they've done that there were actually 3 separate eruptions that left about 5 inches of ash on Santorini. And then a couple days later, there were 2 big eruptions that accounted more than 100 foot of ash on Santorini. And that's only what landed on the island. The same amount of ash that landed on the island landed on every square foot of the ocean as well, because it wasn't only the island that the ash would land on, it landed on everything that was around the volcano. What I realize now is a lot of women survived more so than people understand. And we know that because of information we get a part of the Nile, the high coast, and it is the same place as Goshen. So we're going to see a correlation here between the high coast civilization that is reported to have been in Egypt and the Philistines and the Hebrews. And this video is going to be talking about Genesis, pretty much what Moses wrote from the time of Joseph, which is about Genesis 46 on. And what I'm going to be talking about, as I have said in the past, is what I'm trying to express isn't what people felt, isn't necessarily what was written, it's what actually happened. I'm talking about history. If it didn't actually happen, it wasn't history. It was just reported someplace, and we know from all the reporting that is done that a lot of reporting gets done that is a little bit of bolstering about one's position more so than giving actual facts. And what I'm trying to do is, we could say it's actual facts, but it has nothing to do with facts. It is now history. If it really happened, then I would like to be aware of it and report it. If it is only something that someone made up, and one of them that, my videos have been on YouTube now for more than 6 months, and I still have people saying out loud Minoans. Now, Minoans is totally misleading, not only because they never existed. It's like I said before, you might as well say the Donald Ducklings or the Mickey Mouseketeers is more honest than to say the word Minoan. So to say the word Minoan out of your mouth shows pervasive horsepower engines are, because people would rather have a lie prevail if they're the one selling the lie than to admit that it's not true and that they were mistaken. Now, the reason that we know the Minoans is an absolute lie. The one palace at Knossos is 5 times the size of the White House. Now, I know that was a Philistine manufacturing facility, and so it was very large, and I'm not surprised about that. But when they call it a palace that was built for the Minosaur, you have to ask an intelligent person, how many Minosaurs have you seen in your life? And the answer is none. Then why are you reporting that Arthur Evans made a mistake? He told you something that he thought was true. And as I said before, all of us are allowed to believe anything we want to believe. We can believe anything. It's all up to us to have our own belief system. And there's nothing wrong with Arthur Evans thinking that. But for an intelligent human being to misquote an obvious lie. Now, why do I say it's an obvious lie? Because the answer is No one's ever seen a Minosaur. I know that Minosaurs never existed. It's a myth. It's a Greek mythology. Even the word mythology tells you it's a myth. Now, how many people are going to spend the effort to build a building 5 times the size of the White House in Washington, D.C. for an animal that never existed? That's why it's a fraud on the people just to make the statement. But, you know, everyone has a right to say what they want to. That's why I'm doing this. I want you to know that if I make a mistake, I'd appreciate it if you'd tell me, because I like to make sure I adjust my thinking to what the truth actually is. Now, as I have said before, I am a Christian, and I believe some of the personality of God is that God is love and God is truth. And so truth is what I'm trying to express here. And the truth is, as a result of what I hear about history and putting together the details that I've come up with, that doesn't seem to correlate with the details of other people. Now, I'm only giving this as an opening, and now I'm going to get to it. I'm going to be talking about the period about the time of Joseph, or maybe a little before. And what we're talking about is we're talking about the time in Egypt that is right at the destruction of the Philistines. So time-wise, it would be 1550 BC. Now, at that time, we had the 18th dynasty coming into play. And we know that during the 18th dynasty was the time that Moses started writing. Now, is that a little bit of a problem for me? Yes, because the 18th dynasty starts sometime around 1500 to 1600 BC, before the Common Era. And so the time that the Israelis moved into the land of Canaan was about 1250. Between 1250 and 1550 is about 300 years. So Moses, when he's supposedly wandering in the wilderness with the Israelites, we're talking about a period that is about 300 years after the Philistines have basically been decimated. Now, my adjustment is that I think probably over 80% of them were destroyed. However, when the first eruption happened, a lot of the people got concerned and got off of the island. Now, the reason I know that is if we look at the details of the people at that time that were in the Delta area of Egypt, and they call them the Hycosis, and they had a trading community. Now, people have mistakenly said they invaded. No, what they were is when 1550 happened to the Philistines, some Philistines did get out of Dodge. And what they did is they relocated onto the delta of the Nile. Now, at that time, it wasn't being used for much because the delta, it has a lot of grassland, but it's only good for herding. And as Moses wrote in the 46th chapter of Genesis, that every farmer considers herdsmen an abomination. So what we're talking about and the distinction I'm going to make here are the differences between a free society and a slave society. Now, the free society I'm talking about is what I've expressed before, is the Philistines. The Philistines, everyone was equal, even the women. The women were not second-class citizens. They held their own to every male, and all of the Philistine males supported them as much as they would when some American gets picked on and the people around look like that he cannot defend himself against the people who are picking on him, so they step in to equalize the situation. Now, as I said before, I think that the Homo sapiens back then were just as intelligent and just as knowledgeable as we are. And I think that the Philistines would have stepped in and helped another one that was being picked upon. And unfortunately, the women now are being picked upon because every slave society subjugates women as less than citizens. We know that because of the problem they have in Egypt with the pharaohs. A couple of women did take the position as pharaoh. It is well documented that they disguised themselves to look like a male so that they would be accepted. Now, the Philistine women didn't have to do any disguising. They used makeup. They went around with their breasts showing. They did not have a sexual problem about being raped or taken advantage of. They were free women in a free society. And as far as I know, that's the only free society that's ever existed on the face of the planet. I would love that I could visit and maybe become part of their society on an ongoing basis, because their society is a free society and every human being in the society is equal to every other human being. Now, that is the distinction I'm going to be making between the people, because the thinking between a free person is going to be different than a horsepower engine that's just trying to see how much traction he can get. And in the story that we're talking about, there's going to be a lot of that. And why do I say that? Well, as I expressed before, during this time period, Akhenaten was a pharaoh of Egypt. Now, what is unusual, Akhenaten was not supposed to be a pharaoh. He was the number 2 son. Now, in a slave society, there are stages. The number 1 son is important. He is someone that is going to inherit, move forward. His father thought that he was going to be the next pharaoh. Unfortunately, ended up dying. That no longer was a possibility. Now, we have some very unusual occurrences that happened after that. At the time that Akhenaten became co-pharaoh with his father, was probably the most golden age that Egypt has ever seen. And that is because the father, even though his wife was a half-breed, commoner, and both of his sons were considered half-breeds by the people at the time, he basically was a good commander, and he enlarged the southern part of the Egypt-controlled area, so it included the gold fields of Africa in one of the major gold fields. So they had a lot of gold that they could use to support their trading activity. Now, another thing is one of the pharaohs that was a female, Habeshat, she took over at a time when the trading empires were starting to implode. The volcano had erupted on Thera. Most of the Philistines are now wiped off the face of the earth. We do have a lot of them in the high coast, but only Philistines. Between the Greeks that were there were a lot of Arabs that would come down from the Levant, and they were there. And as I said, Moses was called to make a nation out of shepherds. Now, I could say herdsmen, but primarily the Israelites, I do not think, dealt with a lot of cattle. I think the cattle was left mainly to the people that were willing to do herding that had been Philistines, and the Philistines did everything. They were the first creators that Homo sapiens ever engaged in. There are a lot of animals out there running around, and they're animals that are in Homo sapien bodies. So just because we have a body of a Homo sapien doesn't mean we have a mind that is mature enough. We can act like an animal as well, and we know that because of Stalin and the people that killed the 100 million Russians that allowed communism to exist for a little over 100 years. We know that one Homo sapien is not allowed to kill another Homo sapien. Now, do we have that as a rule? No, we're still retarded. We're more retarded in a lot of ways than the Philistines were 4,000 years ago. So some of you IQ people that think you're smarter and you're putting two and two together, you've missed the boat. Wake up. Let's start expressing truth as what it is, truth. And all the other things are made up. Now, in my Christian brothers, I cannot be too popular because we clearly know an angel of God supposedly came down and killed 185,000 Assyrians. What was that? Bolstering. It was bragging about the amount. How many did I say there was? Probably 1,800. So when you know the difference between 1,800 and 180,000, and you know both of those are exactly the same story, then you will get kind of a indication of how far off the mark you can be and still think you're giving us something intelligent, and it's all garbage. So let's start making truth truth. Let's make some facts for it and make it work. And while I'm talking about it, we'll talk about Moses. Now, I am saying that I think Moses actually existed. I know that some of the people saying it's all myth about Moses. The reason they say that is I say that Moses grew up in the palace with Akhenaten and his older brother. Now, that would have been in the mid 1300 BC. Now, the Israelites moved in to the promised land about 1250 BC. Now, the difference between 1250 and 1350 is 100 years. Now, Moses is supposed to have lived 120 years. If he did, then that could account for it. I don't think that Moses did, because lifespan back then was about 40 years old. Did that mean people couldn't live to 60? And on an outside stretch of the imagination, maybe hit 70? It may have happened. It may not have happened. But anytime you're getting in that area, you've got to know you're on real quicksand and you can get sucked under in a hurry. So don't be too confident that you're telling anyone the truth, because when you're getting over 40 years old, then you're gone beyond the limit. So it is possible that when the stories of Moses are told, that they are a conglomerate of what happened for a couple hundred years. And so they threw in the name Joshua so that Moses had a friend that was Joshua. And when Moses died, Joshua continued on so we could catch up with reality and come up with the same thing. Now, the reason that I mention that is I've already mentioned before, when we read the story in the Bible, the story of Joshua is almost duplicated word for word on things that Moses supposedly did when he was alive. So all you have to do is look at both stories and you probably know, aha, this gives an indication that both of these stories were embellished. So now that we know they're embellished, let's see if we can figure out what the truth is. But now that I've gone on with that, we're going on with Moses' story. As I said, Moses had to leave because if he was responsible for the older brother being killed, he had to get out of Dodge. It didn't make any difference that his uncle thought he was a nephew. If you had anything to do with the death of my son, your head is going to roll. But needless to say, he never put the two together. Moses got out of Dodge, and Moses came back to get the Israelites. Now, how do I know the high coasts were part of the Philistines? It's just adding two and two again, because they were in a city in the area that was called Avarice. Avris, I believe, is the way it's spelled. It's on the Nile Delta, and it's good for grazing. So that's where the herdsman would be. When Joseph in the Bible came down to Egypt to live, the Pharaoh put him in Goshen. Goshen is the general name for the entire area of the Nile Delta. So Goshen and Avarice are the same place. Goshen would be like the name of the state of California, and Avarice would be like the name of the city of Los Angeles. So it was a city within the area of Goshen, and the Bible tells us that Joseph, predecessors to the life of Moses, was in that area as well. Area of Avarice, and they were known as the High Coast, is because of the agreement they had with the Egyptians. I had already said I didn't know how so many of them survived that they could fill up 5 cities way up in the Levant. But now that I know more accurately some of the history of the area, all that they did was evacuate from the city, which was Avarice, and Avarice now became deserted. Now, how do I know that? Because Pi Ramses is right in the same area. And Pi Ramses is the first city that any pharaoh has ever built in that area. And since it was such a great trading location, Ramses put a fort there. That way people coming into Egypt would realize Egypt is protected. And if you're going to challenge us, you better be ready to fight. So that's why we know now that if you want to trace where did the High Coast people go, they went up to the 5 cities of the Levant. When did they get there? From my calculations now, to 20 to 30 years before the Israelites started to move into the hill country. Now, what were they doing in that time period? They were what Moses called wandering in the wilderness. It's the same attitude that people have when they continue saying things that are not true, that logically should be looked at by them and change their thinking. Now, the only reason I mention it is, as I said before, that's why I'm doing these YouTube videos. For now, please tell people about me. Tell people to subscribe if they're willing to, and people to tell other people about my channel so that we can spread the word and start getting some benefits of the free society that the Philistines had 4,000 years ago and had for 8,000 years besides that. So for now, goodbye. I want to thank you that are coming and listening. I am still pushing the fact no human being in the United States of America should have advantages that any other human being does not, regardless of what they are or what their limitations are. We all should be free and equal. And goodbye for now.